Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going to be covering what if Deku had a black blood quirk. An ability based off the Soul Eater series that I put my own unique spin-off on. In this video, Deku's gonna be able to manipulate his blood to conjure weapons, have insane boosted physical stats, and even have a sentient defense system like Gaara himself. Safe to say, this Deku's gonna be busted, so if you want to see a world where Deku learns to control these powers, then stick around to the end of the video. Oh, and by the way, this video is commissioned by this legend right here. So with that said, enjoy. Alright, we begin our story off with the day that Deku unlocks his quirk. The way that I see this happening is we would essentially have like about 1 week to 2 weeks after Bakugo would unlock his quirk, we would essentially get a scene of Deku playing with markers and stuff like that. Like the dude is doing the usual elementary school type stuff, right? And he's minding his business or whatever when suddenly Deku would go down to pick up a marker he would drop. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys where like you guys got like little scratches randomly. It would be random objects. Like for me, it happens every now and then just because I'm a little bit clumsy. Like I'll like move and I'll like accidentally cut myself, or like I'll walk past a door and not look at where I'm walking and I'll like scratch myself with the door frame or something like that. Stuff like that is just like stuff that most people I feel like don't go through, but I do, which is, you know, I'm kind of hanging myself out to dry here because now you guys know what's up. But the point is Deku would essentially end up kind of like nicking himself, which leads to a little bit of blood coming out of Deku, and like usual, it would be its normal black color because ever since Deku was born and they pretty much ended up giving him his like kid shots and he like bled out like a little bit of blood, you know, when the doctor gives you your first shots as a baby, the blood that came out was pitch black. Deku, seeing that, not thinking too much of it, would proceed to hold his hand as he would, you know, wince in pain a little bit but pick up his marker. And suddenly Deku would realize that the blood itself was seemingly bending to his whim, as it would cover the area that he had cut himself on and form a perfect little like armor. I don't want to say armor, but like the perfect covering to completely close off the injury. Deku, seeing that, would begin to actually use his hand to move that little bit of blood around, as it would begin to move all throughout his hand, and he would say, "Look!" Suddenly, all the people in the classroom would go to look at Deku, and they're like, "Whoa, I guess this must be your quirk. What is that? Is that ink?" Deku, feeling a bit embarrassed about the fact that his blood is literally pitch black, would be like, "Yeah," as we would essentially get the teacher saying, "Congratulations, Deku, you awakened your quirk. Bit of a late bloomer, but at least you got one." And Kachan would come in being like, "Ha, so you got a quirk too, Deku. Guess that means we're gonna become heroes someday, aren't we?" And he would tell Deku to go find out how strong his quirk is, as Deku would do just that, making his way to the quirk docker with Inko, as like expected from Inko and pretty much everybody in the family, they would end up telling Deku that his quirk has something to do with his blood, saying that his quirk is sort of a mutation type, but kind of like an emitter quirk in the sense that Deku's able to control his quirk. Similarly to how Inko can pretty much pull close objects, Izuku's able to manipulate the blood inside of his own body to do simple things, like direct blood flow to certain spots in his body and also manipulate a small amount of it outside of his body. The doctor would end up running tests on Izuku to see just how much control he has on his blood, and sadly enough, Deku's control of his blood quirk would be limited to small little droplets of blood. So Izuku would make his way back to class kind of saddened by the fact that his quirk was so weak, it was almost meaningless. When he would go on to explain Bakugo what his quirk was, Bakugo's huge grin that he would have on his face would slowly dissipate as he would look at Deku with seemingly disappointment. He'd say, "Well, at least you're not quirkless, but you might as well be." As Deku, hearing that, would look down as he's like, "Don't say that, Kachan. I bet if I work on my quirk, I can make it strong enough to maybe be a hero like Vlad King." Bakugo would say, "Don't get your hopes up, Deku. Your quirk, from what I saw yesterday, is nothing but a weak quirk that essentially lets you control droplets of water. You'll be lucky if you can even become a cop someday." As he would laugh at Deku, and his friends would begin to actually gang up on Deku, making fun of him. This would lead Deku to kind of just sitting there feeling horrible. This man just got bullied for having a quirk, but it's not because he has a quirk that he got bullied, it's because of how weak it is. Because I don't think I'm doing it justice. This quirk is weak. This man might not have a, like, this man might as well not have a quirk. Genuinely, that's how weak this quirk is. And what's interesting is that this kind of stuff just wouldn't change for Deku. He would try training with this quirk over the years, and because he has this quirk that essentially allows him to control the blood in his body, he would look up heavily to a hero like Vlad King, a hero that would come out recently once Izuku made his way towards middle school or maybe elementary school. I don't know how old Vlad King is or how long he's been a hero, but you know, he's the only real hero that has like a blood quirk, and he's the leader of class 1B, I believe it was. But the point is, Deku over the years would try his best to, you know, manipulate his blood quirk or whatever, and it would get to the point where now Deku could manipulate larger amounts of his blood, but it just gets to the point where it's like, the dude couldn't take out a random street thug, much less was he going to be able to take out robots or even take out a villain on a rampage. Deku thought maybe I could be a support type hero, but it's not like he could do blood transfusions or something like that. Deku could only control his own blood, which was strange because it was black blood, so his only affinity was for his own blood. That said, we eventually jumped to the day where we would get the sludge villain incident, as the teacher would walk into the room and, just like I do in most of my what ifs, throws the papers up into the air. Bakugo declares that he's going to be the greatest hero of all time, even better than All Might himself. He was going to be the richest and strongest hero there ever was. And as Bakugo would be doing his regular gloating, the teacher would say, "Oh yeah, Izuku Midoriya, you also want to go to the national school, don't ya?" Bakugo, hearing this, would throw an explosion straight towards the face of Deku, as he would send him crashing out of his desk, and Deku, looking up at Bakugo, would be scared as he would put both hands up, trying to defend himself for all of Bakugo's oncoming blows, but luckily for him, the teacher was there so they wouldn't come. Teacher would say, "Bakugo, let him go. Don't make me send you to the principal's office again." Bakugo would say, fine, I'll let him go. And he would make his way back towards his desk as Deku would pick himself up and people would begin laughing at him, seeing as he just got bullied. In this timeline of events, people still wouldn't hang out with Deku, not because he was quirkless, but just because of the fact that Bakugo picked on him so much. And he only would have done that because Deku never gave up on his dream of becoming a hero, and Bakugo felt almost insulted that he would be willing to put himself in the same echelon as him, or so that's how Bakugo would look at him. Because he was the only one that really wanted to become a hero, and Deku, having such a weak quirk, thought he could do it too. This just made Bakugo feel extremely offended because of the dude's, you know, I'm the main character persona that he has going on. So with that being the case, Deku kind of still would be the same character that we get in the original, very shy, but at the bare minimum has a quirk, so he'd have a couple of friends, I guess you could say. That being said, after class would finally be over and Deku would be writing in his hero analysis notebook, Bakugo, just like he does in the original, would arrive in front of him as he would snatch the notebook out of his hand, saying, "What do we got here, Deku?" "Hero analysis? What are you writing this for? It's not like you're ever gonna need it. Why don't I hang on to it and I'll actually use these notes one day when I'm out on the field, right guys?" He would throw it to one of his friends and they would say, "Yeah, look at this. He has a whole analysis on Mount Lady. What a joke." Bakugo would say, "Now listen here, Deku. You show up to the entrance exam at UA and I'll kill you." As he would shoot explosions from his hand, and Deku, seeing this, would be intimidated. Deku, knowing that his quirk has literally zero offensive firepower, would simply cower in fear of Bakugo, knowing that if he tried to stand up to him, he'd just get beat up again. So Deku would just accept this as he would watch Bakugo walk away with his notebook and grab his things, as he would just kind of sit there wishing that his quirk was better. But Deku would look up and begin laughing like All Might as he would say, "No, I'll have 10 months to work on my quirk. If I can get just a bit strong, just have one ability that my quirk can have to help me maybe defeat a villain, then that's all I need. I don't need to be the greatest hero in the world. I just need to become one." And so Deku would begin laughing as he'd be like, "Ah ha ha ha," like he would in the original. He would walk throughout the sewer tunnel, or not the sewer tunnel, but the same like tunnel or alleyway thing that he would go through where he meets the sludge villain. And just like in the original, Deku would be captured moments away from death before ultimately being saved by All Might. After this would happen, Deku's encounter with All Might would actually change drastically, because A, Deku actually does have a quirk, and B, Deku's not going to be grabbing onto All Might's leg when he ends up shooting off, going to take the sludge villain to the police station. That said, when Deku wakes up, he would ask All Might if he can become a hero, even with a weak quirk. As All Might would say, "I'm sorry, kid, but with a weak quirk, almost nobody could become a hero. what's your quirk anyways? As Izuku, looking towards All Might, would go on to explain that he has a blood manipulation quirk, saying that he can control his own blood, and that's really about it. All Might hearing that would think that that doesn't sound like a weak quirk, but Izuku would kind of just, have a little bit of sweat going down his face as he'd say, "It is if I can't even control my own blood that well." As All Might hearing this would say, "Well, kid, yeah, my answer still stands. There's just no way that you could become a hero nowadays with villains rampaging like crazy. You got a new nut job out there every day, and he'd hate for him to get killed because of this." He would tell him that it's a good dream to have, but he should just stick to trying to be a fireman or a police officer, saying that jobs like that are necessity for hero society, and Deku would be perfect for something like that. Hearing this, Deku would look downcast as he would say, "Yeah, you're right, All Might. I do have a weak quirk after all. Thanks for saving me. I gotta go." As he would just walk home sadly. We would essentially after this get a scene of All Might saving Bakugo just like he does in the original, with him eventually realizing that if he doesn't step up, Bakugo's gonna die. So he would do it out of necessity without Deku needing to step in and inspire him like he would in the original. And so we would essentially just get Deku going home and burying his face in a pillow where he would think, "Damn Quirk, even All Might thinks you're weak. What should I expect? I've always been a bit of a weakling. I might as well have been born quirkless, but I guess I should be counting my lucky stars. At least I have a quirk." As Deku would get up and begin reading comic books, trying to live out his fantasy in his mind, imagining himself with a powerful quirk, something that actually would have allowed him to become a hero in some distant world or something like that. But as Deku did this, he would think, "No, I can get stronger. I can do something to make my quirk useful." And so, for the following 10 months, Deku would do his absolute best training, but not exactly knowing what the best training program is or what to do, all Deku would be limited to would be basic calisthenic workouts, maybe going to the gym and trying to figure out how to actually do workouts properly, which you'd be surprised, actually takes some time. It took me like months before I could even figure out how to do a lat pull. So yeah, Deku would train, try his best, but ultimately the dude would just fail horribly. As Deku would get more and more desperate and eventually make his way onto the internet as he would begin searching for ways to make his quirk grow stronger. There'd be something that Deku has always been aware of, which is essentially quirk enhancement drugs, something that's been on the market forever. And Izuku would start to get so desperate as the days would approach closer and closer to the day of the entrance exam, where Deku decides that might even be his only choice. Maybe if he uses some sort of quirk enhancement drug, he'll finally be able to make his quirk seem somewhat viable. So Deku, against his better judgment, would end up buying the quirk enhancement drug by somebody on the market. But what Deku didn't realize is that this one was extremely poorly made, in the sense that the chemicals that go into Deku's body are actually going to be altering his mind in some way, shape, and form. And so, as the days would finally approach, Deku would make his way onto UA campus, where he would hold the vial or whatever you want to call it, like this little tube that pretty much injects into his body. You could really inject it anywhere, but the best spot would probably be his neck. But that being the case, Deku would walk inside, taking the written portion of the test, as then they would have the robot section explained to them. And as Deku sees the size of these robots on the screen, Deku starts to envision what these robots actually look like in real life, as he starts feeling genuine fear. Deku, noting that he's gonna have to use this thing, would hope that everything goes well, that he doesn't lose control over his quirk the way that he knows many have before in the past. So as time would pass and he would slowly start feeling as though the test is about to begin, he would suddenly hear Present Mike saying, "Go, go, go! There's no countdowns in a real battle, begin!" As everybody begins running forward and Deku would be the last one left behind, he would simply gulp as he would inject himself with this drug, dropping the vial to the ground, as he would then feel his body just begin changing. Deku would feel the blood flow in his body go crazy, as Izuku in this moment would proceed to unconsciously or subconsciously, I don't know what the right word would be, cut himself in his arm, as blood would begin pouring out of it, and Deku would rush like a madman towards the direction of one of the robots. As creating a scythe out of his black blood, Deku would rush towards this thing and cut it to pieces. Deku would go on an absolute rampage after having injected himself with the blood, and he would not stop until even after the exam would finally be over. Deku, using his brand new abilities, which consist of essentially increased strength thanks to the blood flow going through his body, and weaponization of his black blood capabilities that normally he never would have access to. This Deku would clearly look unstable, as eventually the pro heroes would end up having to come down, telling Izuku that the test is over, after some people around him would have told him, dude, the test's over. Deku would have simply ignored them and bashed the head of the robot in, just completely hitting it over and over and over. Deku would finally then have a pro hero come up to him, which would be the pro hero Aizawa. As using his erasure quirk, he would grab onto Deku by the face and arm, erasing it completely, as Deku, looking at Aizawa and finally snapping into his right mindset, would realize the test was over. Deku would begin to panic as he would look at Aizawa with fear in his eyes, and Aizawa would tell him why he didn't stop when he was directly ordered to. Deku would go on to just panic, staying quiet, saying, sorry, I didn't hear you, as Aizawa would look towards the direction of Deku, and when he saw him speak, he could note that Deku's tongue had become black. Seeing this, he would look at Deku as he would drag him with him towards a room at UA, as he would go on to interrogate him, asking him if he ended up using a quirk enhancement drug. He would pick up a vial as he would hold it in Deku's face, saying, was this yours? And Izuku, feeling like there was all the pressure on the world on his shoulders, would simply look down, as all his demeanor would go down to just like a cornered dog, as he would look at Aizawa saying, yeah, it's mine. Aizawa goes on to say, I thought so. What would have possessed you to use something like this during the exam? Are you not aware of the effects that this has on people? People have lost their minds and even died using this dumb quirk enhancement drug on the market. What could have possessed you to go to such lengths in order to use something like this for the exam, where you could have potentially hurt other applicants? Izuku, looking at him, would say, my quirk's weak. As Aizawa would say, speak up. And Deku would say, my quirk's weak, okay? I have a weak quirk, and I wanted to become a hero so badly that I decided to put myself at risk and everybody else. I'm sorry, he would say through tears, as he would fall down to his hands and knees, begging Aizawa for a second chance, for another opportunity to prove that he's not a bad person. Aizawa, looking at Izuku, would tell him, it's too late for that. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges. You'll never be a student here at UA. A hero would never put others in danger in order to achieve their own selfish ambitions. You're no hero, he would say, as he would essentially take Deku home by force, dragging him home like a police would do if you were ever to get in trouble, and take him to the front door of Inko's porch, as he would go on to explain to her what Deku did during the entrance exam. Inko, hearing this, would cover her face with her hands on some, oh my, did my son really do that type timing, as Aizawa, he pretty much just says that's exactly what he did. Keep a better eye on him. As Deku would walk towards his room and just get one last glimpse of Aizawa, as Deku, angrily making his way towards his room, would think that he didn't want to take it that far. He just wanted to become a hero. Deku would punch at the wall, and Inko, seeing Deku in this state, would simply just close the door, not having the resilience or the strength to tell Deku how she really feels or that she's sorry or anything. She would simply close the door as she slumps down behind it and thinks, where did I go wrong? Eventually, a couple of hours would pass, and Deku would have woken up from a nap after having pretty much beat himself up over the embarrassment he put his mom through. He would end up hearing a weird voice in his head. Not sure if it was a voice or if it was something else, completely unsure of what was going on, but he felt a strong and powerful urge to have more of whatever that drug was. For some reason, Deku felt like he just didn't have enough, and that was inherently the drug's purpose. This drug dealer ended up adding something into the drug which made it 100 times more addictive than any other quirk enhancement drug on the market, and Deku desired more and more, not to mention the fact that it ends up affecting Deku's quirk to a quote-unquote cellular level, is the best way I could describe it, as this would actually end up affecting Deku's quirk and making his quirk almost have a bit of a sense of sentience, in the sense that the quirk was starting to gain a sense of self slowly. Right now, it was just in the mode of like making suggestions towards Deku, but potentially later on, if I even remember this plot point, I'll make it actually be a bigger deal. That said, I have a little bit of an announcement I actually want to say before I continue the video and actually forget about this. I quickly wanted to ask you guys a question. Comment down below this. Have you guys been getting notifications from my videos lately? Because if not, then you might not even be the only one. Lately, a lot of people have been commenting that they didn't even get the notifications for certain videos that I'll upload. So check if you've been getting my notifications in your YouTube feed, and if you haven't, then do yourself and me a favor, specifically me a favor, and turn off your post notifications for my channel and turn them back on and then select all. I know a lot of YouTubers say this and I never thought I'd have to be one of them, but I think I low-key might have to start telling you guys this because YouTube is doing a awful job at recommending my videos to my viewers. So that said, if you guys want to be updated on when I upload a video, then turn your post notifications on just to get a more consistent update on them. That said, let me get back into the story and stop yapping. Deku, after beginning to feel an uneasy feeling of needing more of this drug, would proceed to actually go back on the dark web, where he would search out the same guy that had sold him the drug in the first time and steal some money from Inko's purse, which hopefully she wouldn't notice, as he would make his way to the same alleyway where he would have met the man in the first place and buy more of the drug. He would buy 3 valves of this quirk enhancement drug, and Izuku would sit there in the alleyway as the man would leave with himself thinking that he needs it now. The man, after selling Deku the drug, would run away knowing that people who buy more always end up using it almost immediately. So Deku, after injecting himself, would simply think, now I can be a hero in his own way. He's justifying this to himself as telling himself that he's only doing this because he wants to be a vigilante and help the heroes some way. And so Izuku would go do a little bit of a night patrol on this particular night, finding a group of thugs that were out harassing people, similarly to what you would kind of see in My Hero Vigilantes. I don't know if you guys have seen that yet. If you haven't, go check it out. It's really cool. But Deku would find, a group of thugs which are using their quirks to pretty much intimidate somebody, as he would land in front of them and he would end up saying to leave him alone, as these thugs would say, "Get out of here, wimp," as Deku, from the cut that he made on his body, would shoot out 4 orbs of black blood which simply float in the air, when suddenly needles would begin shooting out of them, made out of this blood, which would be so hard that they seem like the ones that Haku would use in Naruto, similarly to the Senbon needles. These needles would pierce these guys, and one of them would actually end up having fatal injuries, not dying, but nearly did. Deku, after this would happen, would turn towards the person he saved, and even they would be scared. Deku, seeing this look in his eye, would actually for a moment waver on his conviction, but he would continue rampaging using his quirk and essentially, beating up villains or thugs or whatever it is that he ends up finding to a pulp, taking things way too far, to where Deku, after just the first night, would already be considered a villain that the heroes are on the lookout for. This would continue for a second night about a week later, with Deku being cautious and holding off on using the quirk enhancement drug again with all of his strength, considering that this dude was itching to use it once again. And so after that time would pass, Deku would do it once more, but this time Deku couldn't tell the difference between friend or foe, and even the victims that he was supposed to be helping ended up getting hurt by Deku, way worse than the people that were trying to do the bad things to them. Deku would even use his quirk to injure random bystanders, and at this point Deku was now a big deal in the area that he lived in, with people being scared to go out at night thanks to this random villain of the week in the police's eyes. But that being said, the third night and the last valve of the quirk amplification drug that he would have would finally be used the next night after his previous rampage, and this time Deku would never be able to turn back. Deku would rampage, and this time he would go on to actually kill people who were standing nearby. His black blood quirk would cause a bunch of orbs to appear as black needles would go flying in different directions, actually killing and injuring a bunch of innocent bystanders. There would be a lot of damage done to the street, and Deku would let out a maniacal cry as he would go on to actually laugh as tears would come out of his eyes with him losing himself. Suddenly, a hero would end up arriving, actually being, a random top 75 hero or something like that, and would try to face off against Deku, but Deku would absolutely obliterate him by using his black blood quirk and shooting needles at the man's direction. This would cause Deku to have a huge search party going out for him, as we would have heroes like Endeavor and Aizawa and them actually looking for Izuku on this night. All the while he would try to escape. Eventually Aizawa, noting Izuku and seeing what he looks like, would know exactly who this kid is, as he would chase him saying, "Get back here." He would chase Izuku and ultimately end up using his erasure quirk on him, as Deku would turn the corner and then, being out of Aizawa's line of sight, would activate his quirk once more. As turning the corner, Deku would be greeted to a purple and black mist, which would be Kurogiri. Kurogiri would offer Izuku an opportunity to get out of here, and Izuku would accept it almost instantly, with the effects of the drug almost wearing off. Deku would appear in a random bar as he would be surrounded by a man with black mist and Shigaraki. Izuku, looking around, would question who they are and why they helped him, as Shigaraki, looking towards Izuku, would go on to tell him that he's a friend, that he's on Deku's side, and that he has a proposal for him. Shigaraki would go on to explain that he's seen his work and he's seen the stuff that he's been able to do with his quirk, saying that the League of Villains could use somebody powerful like him on their side. Deku, hearing this, would say, "What? Villains? I'm not a villain. I couldn't join you guys. There's no way." But Shigaraki, looking at Izuku, would say, "You're not a villain? Then why would you kill so many people then, huh? You're all over the news, kid. You're public enemy number one. You have no choice but to join us at this point. You're already a villain whether you like it or not, Izuku Midoriya." Izuku, hearing that, would think, "How do you know my..." As he would look at the TV that's currently, showing the news, and he would see that his name, as well as his quirk and his address and stuff like that, what he looks like in his picture, would be public news. Aizawa, having been the hero that had seen Deku run away, would know who he was, and reporting it to the police, reports would go out instantly about this new villain that's rampaging with the blood quirk, that if you see him, you have to run away immediately and find cover as fast as you can, since he has a tendency to shoot sharp needles at people, which have been fatal. And Deku, seeing this, would be like, "No, I didn't," as memories would come flooding to Deku's mind, and he would have even not realized that he would have killed those people, but now it was all too real. And Deku, realizing that he literally has no choice, would just look at Shigaraki, as he would get into almost like a fetal position, as he would ask Shigaraki why he did that. And Shigaraki would go on to explain that he doesn't know, but what he does know is that out there, Hero Society won't accept him. They won't believe that it was an accident or that Deku wasn't acting in his right mind. To the world, he's nothing but a villain, and with them, he can become more than that. Deku, hearing this and realizing that Shigaraki's literally right, he has no other option, would question this, but his mind would push him, telling him, "Accept. Do it. Become powerful. Become a villain. Show everyone they were wrong." You would just hear random whispers, you know what I mean? Deku, looking at Shigaraki's hand that is extended towards him, would grab it as he would stand up, and Shigaraki would say, "Perfect. Well, I'll introduce you to the rest of the family soon." As we would then get a time skip to the very next day, where Izuku would see a small girl with blonde hair in a schoolgirl outfit, and a man with a black trench coat, black hair, and burned skin walk into the room. It would be Dabi and Toga, and Deku's first introduction with them would be a bit of a strange one, but Deku couldn't help but notice how pretty that Toga girl was, in his opinion. As Deku would meet them, he would have a conversation with Toga, who'd go up to him and say, "So, you have a blood quirk? Can I see it?" Izuku would go on to show her his blood quirk, as the effects of the drug enhancement drug would now begin to be permanent on Deku. After having it used so many times, it would have fused with his own quirk, causing Izuku's effects of the enhancement to become permanent. And Toga's obsession with blood would cause her to instantly fall in love, or not fall in love, I guess, but just have a huge liking towards Izuku, who at this point doesn't exactly operate or feel like a villain. Toga would point this out, saying, "So, what's your story? You don't really feel like the villain type." Izuku, hearing this, would say, I'm new to this. Honestly, I don't even think I could even fight properly." Toga would say, "Ooh, fun, I guess I get to train you." As Izuku, hearing that, would say, "What do you mean train?" And Toga, taking a knife out, would point it at at Izuku as she would say, "You gotta learn how to fight if you're gonna be in with the league." Shigaraki hearing this would say, "That's right, Toga. Why don't you train the kid how to fight with knives?" As Deku and Toga would begin training every single day. All the while this is happening, the attack on the USJ would have ended up going down just like it does in the original, and Deku and Toga would not be part of it, as well as obviously Dabi, just because they weren't there in the original, so they won't be there this time. Deku's lack of presence would be a big deal, because this means that Mineta and Tsuyu would be in way more danger than they would be in the original, thanks to Deku not being able to use his smash on the water and taking out countless villains that he would have done in the original. Also, Tsuyu might even be dead, because without him there, even if they managed to get off of the boat, she would still have to contend with the fact that Shigaraki nearly killed her. But for the sake of the story and not making things too dark just yet, we're going to be saying that everybody ends up surviving and All Might still defeats the League of Villains for plot purposes. For now though, let's cover the training between Deku and Toga, which is something that normally I never have happen. I don't think I've ever done like a Toga x Deku ship, but for this time, because my boy ended up suggesting that I make this happen, I'm gonna make it happen for the one time, alright? But just know, I'm not gonna go crazy, eh? Those days are behind me, alright? I don't do that wild stuff no more. Alright, jokes aside, this whole day would pretty much consist of Deku and Toga working on their knife abilities, or their, tool usage abilities. Izuku would be trained with Toga in terms of knife hand-to-hand combat, and the day would kind of suck for Deku, but it would also be good for him in a way, because he would get closer to Toga on this particular day. The day would start off with Toga, pretty much like skipping and being so excited to play with Deku, as she would say, as she would grab her knife and tell Izuku that she was actually gonna be helping him learn to use a knife. And Izuku would smile as Toga would literally rush at this man with her knife, trying to stab him. Deku's blood would create a little bit of a barrier, or not a barrier, but like a small shield, like goo like blood would appear and harden in front of Deku, as both of his hands would be held out trying to block the attack, as Toga's blade would connect with it, and she would jump back and she would say, "You're pretty good at defense, but how's your offense?" She would rush in once more as she would go to slash at Deku, going with a redirect attack, throwing a feint before then slashing at Deku's leg. Deku having that happen would have blood begin pouring out of it, as Deku would go on to create two big like machete like weapons as he would rush towards Toga's direction, trying to stab her with it. Deku would actually nick her, and some of her blood would come off, as she would see this happen in slow motion with her yellow eyes, seeing this all go down. She would smile as she would say, "You're good." She rushes in, trying to stab at Deku's direction, but Deku, learning how to use his power, would actually go on to create an orb which would shoot a bunch of little random needles at Toga's direction. She runs, dodging most of them, as only a couple of them would hit her, and she would go in to attack Deku once more, again and again and again. She ultimately would get in a couple of nicks on Deku, considering that Deku wasn't fighting Toga with intentions to kill her, because he does like her. So Deku would ultimately end up getting his butt kicked by her, who would be trying to show Izuku how to fight with hand-to-hand combat. Deku would learn a little bit about the basics of this, using knife work and stuff like that, but by the end of the day, Toga would have ended up beating him up a bit and leaving him on the ground, as she would skid on top of him and say, "That was a good day one, rookie." Can't wait to see how the next one will go. As Deku, looking at her, would simply pass out, and Toga would actually lick the tip of her blade, trying to, actually eat Deku's blood. But luckily for her, it would actually go back to Deku's body, as all the blood would instantly go towards him, and Izuku would feel all of his strength return. Toga would pout as she'd be like, "That's not fair. I got that blood fair and square." And Deku would say that she could just take it another day. Right now, he feels exhausted. So he'd make his way to rest, and while this happens, Toga would just go off and do her own thing. After this, they'd have an update on how the USJ thing went down, as a beaten up with many gunshot wounds Shigaraki would end up informing everybody that the heroes won, that damn All Might is not half as weak as they had thought. But all for one everyone would end up assuring him that he really is, and that now they have verifiable proof, saying that back then that would have taken All Might a total of 3 punches tops to defeat that thing, but now it took him multiple. All for one would smile, knowing that his time is getting closer and closer, as by this point about a couple of days would pass before Deku would finally fully heal from his injuries, and we would now have the next time that he would spar with Toga. They would do their usual sparring, and in the midst of this, Toga would not be able to help herself, as through their combat training, she would actually go on to lick Deku's blood. But what's interesting is that the second that she would ingest it, this whole personality that she was showing of being excited and having fun, playing with Deku, as she would say, would go away. She would look down as she would then rush towards Deku, moving at speeds that Deku just wasn't expecting, transforming into Deku himself. She would begin to actually use his quirk, and they would get into a full out fight where Deku and Toga would pretty much dang near fight to the death. This would be an incredible fight that would take place, with Deku learning that Toga has an ability to essentially use other people's quirks that she has a strong attraction to. But on top of that, Toga went what he could only describe as mad when she ended up licking his blood. Deku, realizing this, would come to understand that thanks to that drug amplification thing, it probably did something to the blood in his body, and now on top of the fact that it's being able to be manipulated, that blood itself works as a bit of a drug enhancement itself, also making people go insane while it's at it. It's actually a really useful ability, but unfortunately for him, Toga was now using it back on him, which made it completely backfire. Luckily for Deku, who was actually beginning to lose to Toga, the rest of the villains would end up arriving, breaking up the fight, as they would finally be able to restrain Toga thanks to Kurogiri, who would be able to warp her away somewhere while she calms down. And after a couple of hours would pass, she would be returned, as she would feel a bit of a headache coming down on her. She would walk by Deku, as she would go on to tell Deku that his blood was like none she's ever had before, loving every second of whatever that experience was. As Deku, looking at Toga, would say that he thinks that she shouldn't exactly ingest his quirk, Toga would say it's fine, and Izuku would be adamant of the fact that he doesn't want Toga to do it again. Toga, hearing this and seeing the seriousness in Izuku's eyes, would promise that she wouldn't do it anymore, as she would cross her fingers behind her, and Deku would simply just sit there, as all the League of Villains would have a little bit of a grace period. And what I mean by that is that they're not exactly active, and Deku's not doing anything specifically. He's not going out doing villain activities. Right now, Deku's mainly focused on building a relationship with the League and doing a bit of training and getting a lot stronger, which he has actually, because thanks to Deku's training with the knives, Deku would get a lot better at using this scythe ability. And interestingly enough for Deku, his quirk would get a bit of a weird sentience where it wouldn't speak to him, but it would almost like tell him stuff telepathically. He couldn't hear anything, but he just has these feelings that it's trying to tell him something, and he knows exactly what it is. This blood quirk would actually actively protect Deku by creating barriers whenever Deku, was getting attacked by Toga, or also transforming into the perfect weapon for the situation whenever Deku was in a fight. Not to mention that when Deku was about to get attacked from a blind spot, this thing seemingly told him it was coming, so it had this sentience where it almost helped Deku in tight of fights, but in day-to-day life, it was extremely annoying because it ended up giving Deku a kind of Tourette syndrome, in the sense that he's having these crazy intrusive thoughts and sometimes he'll blurt them out, which weirds everybody out, but Deku and Toga, or not Deku and Toga, but Toga would be really used to it. And so would somebody like, what's that one guy's name? The guy who says stuff like that all the time. Deku would have a great relationship with Twice and Toga, not really too much of a good one with Dabi, and Deku would not like Muscular. He rubs him the wrong way. He sees him as a senseless killer who does things for absolutely no reason, and Deku hates that. But what's he gonna do? He is a villain after all. So as time would pass, eventually Shigaraki would end up recruiting the hero killer Stain, and unlike in the original, where Deku, Todoroki, and Ida were able to take him down, because Deku wasn't on the hero side, and Deku doesn't get one for all, or anybody in Class 1A for that fact, no one is there to go with Gran Torino or stop Tenya Ida's brother from being killed, or even that one hero native who originally would have been killed. That said, Stain actually ends up joining joining the League of Villains completely, and with that being said, Stain's actually going to be part of the Vanguard Action Squad, alongside somebody like Spinner who looks up to Stain, with Stain finding it a bit weird that he dresses up like him, but he thinks of it as not a big deal. That said, we get the usual fights that we would expect, such as Spinner and Magma versus Tiger and Mandalay, with the inclusion of Stain this time because he's actually going to be part of the Vanguard Action Squad, which I already said, I don't know why I'm repeating myself, but yeah, we would also get the same battles between Eraserhead and, Dabi's doubles and stuff like that, and ultimately because Izuku's not on the hero side, unfortunately, or not really, because Inari's kind of annoying. Wait, no, not Inari, Koda. My bad, I'm thinking about Naruto right now. Koda ends up dying to Muscular. There's 100% no way that Muscular's sparing the kid for absolutely no reason. And then obviously we still get Tetsu versus, dang, the dude's name long, versus Itza Kendo and Mustard and then stuff like that. Then we'll get, the students against Moonfish, like Bakugo and Todoroki, but I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words so badly right now, but the major change to this story, apart from the Stain one, would essentially just be Deku and Himiko Toga versus Uraraka and Tsuyu. We're going to be having Deku and Toga bag their first kills together, and unfortunately for these two girls, they would be the victims. There's just no way that they would be able to defend against them, and so I could just see them ultimately making minced meat out of them, with Toga draining all the blood that she wants from Uraraka and Tsuyu, and Izuku using his quirk to ultimately kill Uraraka, who in the original series would actually probably go on to become his wife, which is kind of crazy that bro's killing her in this timeline. But yeah, unfortunate for the hero side, they have 3 casualties at bare minimum, with one of them actually being Mandalay or Tiger, not too sure. But yeah, the point is, the Vanguard Action Squad would be able to complete their mission without a hitch this time around, and they would easily be able to capture Bakugo and Tokiyami, unlike they would have in the original, as we would get a scene in which the villains would teleport back to their hideout, where Shigaraki would begin trying to convince both students to turn over to the villain side. Muscular would actually try to help out as well by saying, "Hey kid, you might as well join the villain side. This way you can actually use that quirk of yours for what it was intended to do, to blow people up. Doesn't it sound like fun? Going out and just killing whoever you want, whenever you want." Bakugo, hearing this from Muscular, would say, "Go to hell," as he would say, "I'm not becoming a villain," and they would then try to pitch their, their little plan to Tokiyami, who would simply stay quiet looking at them. Deku, seeing that none of this was helping, would actually walk towards the direction of Bakugo, as with his weird villain costume, which I'm finally going to get around to describing, would essentially be like a Dead by Daylight black cloak trench coat look, with a weird smile mask to cover his face. And as Deku would step closer and closer to Bakugo, he would finally take his mask off, with Bakugo looking at Deku's face and being shocked at the fact that it was true. This weakling really did become a villain. Bakugo would start to laugh as he would chuckle to himself and think, "You really did it, didn't you? Couldn't quite cut it as a hero, so you decided to join these rejects. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. You always were lackey material." As Deku, hearing this, would get extremely pissed at Bakugo, punching him in the face as he would say, "Shut up!" And Bakugo would simply smile as, with now blood in his mouth, he would spit at Deku's face, with Deku watching that happen in slow motion, as his blood quirk would actually block the spit from making contact with him, and Bakugo being shocked at the fact that Deku now has this new power at his disposal. Bakugo would say, "Guess that new quirk of yours actually..." He would then get punched in the stomach as he was tied to the chair, and Deku would then create a gigantic scythe in his hand as he would go to try to kill Bakugo, but Shigaraki would teleport him away before he could do so, and telling him that they need him as well as the other brat as bargaining chips if they don't become villains, saying that they'll come around. As Deku, looking at Bakugo, would think to himself that he doesn't want him to come around, that he's better off dead right here and right now. But Shigaraki would finally act like a leader and say, "Bloodlust, stand down," As Izuku, hearing this from Shigaraki and the seriousness of his voice, would back up from Bakugo, as he would simply walk out of the room angrily and pissed. He'd be chased by Toga, who would go on to ask him what's wrong, and Izuku would tell her everything, explaining to her the backstory between himself and Bakugo. As Toga, hearing this, would get instantly pissed at Bakugo, wanting to kill him just as badly as Izuku, if not more, for hurting, in her words, her beloved. That said though, Bakugo would be safe just because Shigaraki's orders would dictate that, and so time would pass as eventually we would get a knock on the door at the League of Villains hideout, as you would just hear, "The pizza's here," and Shigaraki in confusion would say, "We didn't order any," but suddenly All Might and the rest of the heroes would come bursting in and would proceed to take out each and every single one of them, restraining them all, including Stain, but excluding Muscular, who wouldn't be present at the time. After this would take place, Deku would actually be one of the villains that was restrained by the heroes thanks to Edgeshot's crazy quirk ability. But as this happens, a black portal would appear, as out of it would step All For One, who would use a gigantic quirk explosion ability to launch a massive attack at the heroes, as this would cause all of them to pretty much let go of all the villains that had been captured, and All For One would stand face to face with All Might, as he would clap it up for him, telling him that he's so glad he could make it to the party. Turning to the direction of Shigaraki, as All Might, looking to Izuku's direction, would think, "It's him, it's that kid." And turning back towards All For One would say, "What are you doing this time, villain?" As All For One would say the same thing as always, All Might. "I'm trying to start a new world with new beginnings where the strong will be at the top and the weak, well, we don't need to talk about them." As he would shoot off another massive attack at All Might's direction, which would blow up a bunch of buildings, causing a catastrophic amount of damage to be piled up, where only a few people would actually end up surviving this blow. Just like in the original, however, as this would happen, Class 1A would actually end up arriving here and trying to take Bakugo back, which would lead Deku to stand face to face against Todoroki, Kirishima, Momo, and Tenya Ida, who would all do their best to try to capture Bakugo and Tokiyami, trying to take them back to Class 1A, but Deku would not be letting that happen, as he would create a gigantic amount of black ball energy spheres, which would proceed to shoot out a bunch of spikes towards their direction, and Momo, using her quirk, would create a shield as she would block this. Kirishima, using his hardening quirk, would be perfect to dodge this. Todoroki, using his ice, would do so as well, and Bakugo would go lunging towards the direction of Deku, as he would go in to try to land an explosion at point blank, but Deku's barrier would appear as black blood would pop up like a shield in front of him, and Bakugo would be completely unable to do a thing to him. Deku, seeing this, would smile as he would say, "I'm not as weak as before," and he would kick towards the direction of Bakugo, as his leg would outstretch by black blood, and it would go shooting towards the direction of Bakugo, landing an attack which would actually send Bakugo back a bit, with him smiling, saying, "I got this," turning towards the rest of them as Bakugo goes flying in with one of his attacks, as he would try to take Deku out. But Izuku, completely unbothered, would shield himself with his quirk, as he would then look towards the direction of Bakugo, telling him he's dead. Out of nowhere, Deku would create wings on his back, as he would create a gigantic scythe with his other hand, and he would go flying towards the direction of Bakugo at speeds that Bakugo wasn't even expecting. Deku would go on to slash at his chest as Bakugo would fall down onto the ground in agony, and he would rush towards the direction of the rest of them, who would, all shocked at the strength that he's displaying, would retreat, or at least Momo and Ida would, saying, "Remember, we said we wouldn't fight," but Todoroki and Kirishima were just not about to let that happen, so they would try to fight off against Deku, but Deku's strange abilities would actually be able to pierce Kirishima and ultimately kill him in one fell swoop. Todoroki would shoot ice at Deku's direction, but Deku, flying up into the air, would get out of his range of attack, as Todoroki, having no choice but to shoot a fire beam at him, would do just that. But Deku, seeing this, would not care about that at all, as he would shoot little tidbits of blood towards the direction of Kirishima. It would end up getting inside of his bloodstream, and he would go absolutely berserk. Looking towards the direction of Todoroki, he would have a complete moment of just chaos as he would rush towards him and try to kill Todoroki, having tunnel vision in this moment. Todoroki and Kirishima would start as a fight, and Ida and Momo would end up getting out of there as Ida would run away with Momo, carrying her on her back. Todoroki would ultimately end up standing up against Kirishima, being a bad matchup, but after taking him out and looking towards Deku, he would acknowledge that he should not be here at this moment. And all the while as that was happening, Bakugo would still remain on the floor, battered and beaten by the Deku, who has now became so much more powerful than he could have ever imagined. Deku, turning towards the direction of All Might and All For One, would watch the battle take place as he would see that All Might was actually doing decently well. He would turn at All Might and say, "Hey All Might," as All Might would turn at Deku and see that his hand was currently being placed on Bakugo's neck, and he would hold a black knife to his neck. As Bakugo weakly would just look at All Might, his eyes dang near shutting from the blood loss and pain, Deku would simply tell All Might that unless he stands down, he was gonna kill him. All For One, hearing this from his little protege, or this new member of the League of Villains, would smile under his mask as realizing the situation he's trying to give All Might would be extremely happy at, Izuku's quick thinking and the the ultimatum he gave him. All Might would simply stand there as he would put his arms down, and All For One would shoot an attack at All Might, which pretty much kills him within not kills him, but it leaves him within an inch of his life, you know what I mean? Deku, seeing this happen, would smirk as he would go on to straight up slash Bakugo in his stomach, causing his bowels to straight come out, as All Might, watching this in his final moments, realizing he died for no reason, would feel so much anger, as the last words that All Might would hear would be, "Guess my quirk wasn't so weak after all, was it, All Might?" As All Might's consciousness would fade and he would pan to black. The cameras would all instantly be turned off as throughout the world you would see people crying after the death of All Might, with the League of Villains simply getting away and preparing for an all-out war with the heroes. As this would happen, we would pan our camera towards the direction of Inko, who would be crying watching the news, seeing that not only had her son been responsible for the death of countless people at this point and All Might, but also his childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo. His son was responsible for the death of his best friend's son, of her best friend's son. And she would get a call from Mitsuki as she would go on to cry over the phone, telling her that she wishes her son had never been born. And honestly, Inko felt the same. She felt so much shame at being called Izuku's mother in that moment, and Inko would lose herself to the despair. After this would happen, there would be two major events that I need to cover really quickly, with one of them being the altercation that they would have with Overhaul in the original. Normally, he ends up pretty much killing Magma when they were talking with each other, but in this timeline, having way more people at their disposal, such as Stain, who in this particular moment wouldn't help, but Deku, whose quirk is pretty much a perfect counter to Overhaul, because what's he gonna do? Overhaul is quirk, it's blood, it's literally blood, you can't do anything but splatter it. Deku would use his quirk to kill Overhaul immediately. By shooting a tiny amount of it into Overhaul's body and bloodstream, Deku would cause Overhaul's body to explode from the inside out, as little traces of black blood would be left behind and Overhaul's mask would be on the ground, as Shigaraki, turning towards Deku, would say, "Well done." And the second altercation that we're going to be seeing is going to be Deku, or not Deku, but the League of Villains versus the Liberation Army arc. Now, it's kind of an interesting one in this situation because originally we know that the League of Villains are going to be winning this altercation, but how they do it is going to be changing now. With Deku's inclusion to the mix, he's going to be able to use his blood quirk to absolutely shred through all of these villains that were going to be trying to defeat them. And just like in the original, Shigaraki's fight against Redestro would still take place like it does. The only reason that I'm not addressing more interest into this arc is just because Deku's not fighting the main character, he's just fighting a bunch of extras whose quirks we're not entirely aware of, or at least I'm not. So I wouldn't even be able to be like, oh, he fights against this guy that gives him problems or something like that. He's simply there to help Twice and Toga out with their own battles. So the damage that they end up taking during this altercation would be minimalized extremely well, and the very last thing that would be left out for the story would be the final war arc that we would get in the original canon after the heroes would end up pretty much raiding the hospital and we would get that crazy fight. In this specific timeline, things are going to go a lot crazier. Because not only in this timeline are they going to be having access to Deku and he won't be on the hero side, but Deku's going to be giving the villains an edge that they never had before. His blood quirk is going to be amplifying the Nomus further than they ever have been before, and thanks to them already being mindless husks, the effects of the mental drug that usually affects normal people wouldn't apply to them. So the Nomus would be 2 times stronger than the ones that already give an incredible amount of trouble to the heroes would rampage, causing massive deaths to go out like crazy, and Shigaraki's destruction of the heroes by using his decay quirk would still happen like originally. Interestingly enough, however, this battle would not go well in terms of the hero's favor, because one specific person would stand out from the rest, and that would be Mirio Togata, who in this version of the story, because Deku never becomes the wielder of One For All, and I was definitely not going to give it to Bakugo, he ends up being the one who ends up holding that quirk. So with him having the rest of the abilities that Deku originally has, such as Black Whip, Danger Sense, Smoke Screen, Gear, what other stuff does he have? Flow, and all those other crazy abilities that Deku gains access to, as well as the crazy strength boost that One For All already grants him, and his permeation quirk, he's going to be an absolute monster, blitzing through the battlefield completely uninhibited by anything that was going on. The Nomus, while yes, they might be difficult to deal with due to their regeneration, are something that he's going to be able to one-shot with the incredible strength that he has, and he would go through this entire gauntlet not taking a single cinch of damage. Shigaraki's quirk would be completely ineffective facing off against somebody like this. And it just becomes one of those things where, yes, Deku is powerful, he's strong, and if he was to land a blow on Mirio or get his blood to actually go into his bloodstream, they could cause Mirio to go insane and kill a bunch of the heroes, or maybe turn on them in a bad way. But because he can't literally touch Mirio, there's just no way that this is going to be happening. So as the battle rages on and Deku in the battlefield is standing watching these Nomus lose their mind and trying to attack Shigaraki, he would feel fear as Mirio comes blitzing in and punches Deku square in the stomach so hard he sends him crashing to the ground, where Deku would be covered in dust, losing all his oxygen, as Deku looking around would have his vision completely blurred, when suddenly rubble from the battlefield would come flying towards the direction of Deku and pierce through the barrier defense that he always creates, similarly to what Gaara does in Naruto. But going through it, it would actually pierce Deku in a fatal spot, as Deku, feeling his life begin to drain from his body, would begin to wonder where he went wrong. He would cough and think, is this it? His voice would begin getting weaker, and he would look around as the Nomus are going crazy. His blood is helping the villains. But as this happens, Toga would get closer to Deku as she would stand near him looking at Deku and realizing that he was gonna die. She would feel so much rage as in this moment she would proceed to just drink some of Deku's blood and rush into the battlefield as, using Deku's quirk, she would attempt to kill Mirio, but it would be all for naught because Mirio wasn't getting touched by a single one of her attacks, and so Mirio would end up piling through every single person that was standing in his way, eventually making his way face to face with Shigaraki, who he would pummel endlessly, understanding that if he takes out Shigaraki, then the entire threat of this world would be gone. And so, landing attack after attack after attack on Shigaraki, he would beat him down. It would simply heal over and over and over, when luckily Aizawa would end up arriving on the battlefield and Deku would see him. Aizawa, glaring at Izuku, would see the kid that he had once told was not worthy of being a hero, as he would then rush past, staring at Shigaraki using his erasure quirk, as that would be the last thing Deku would see. Aizawa helping out the heroes to eliminate Shigaraki's quirk, leading to the ultimate demise of the villains in this series, where Deku having a black blood quirk would not be strong enough to take on somebody as busted as Mirio. The dude is basically Obito from the Naruto verse, and he's way stronger than anything that these guys can offer. So the battle would be a cinch and the heroes would win, with Deku's final thoughts being, I wish I could have been a hero. And that's going to be wrapping up What If Deku Had a Black Blood Quirk. Or maybe I titled it What If Deku Had a Blood Quirk. I don't know. But let me know what you guys thought about it down below in the comments. And don't forget to let the absolute legend Symbiotic6991, I feel like I'm saying an Xbox gamer tag, but yeah, no, let them know how much you appreciate this video if you ended up enjoying it. And if you guys want to get your own video commissioned, check out the community tab. I have more information on there, that's the words I'm looking for. And also check out the recent video I uploaded called Taking What If Suggestions or something like that. I explained how the whole premise actually works in more detail there. But with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, it has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Like it or die! That wasn't the line, Kachan! Whatever!